All right, and welcome to the Bold Strong Podcast. I am your host, Craig Nadeau, and on today's program, we have with us our friend Hamish Knox. Hamish is a sales leader, a trainer, and a podcaster. I just love this guy. He's got a tremendous energy and so much good knowledge. We have some great topics that we're going to cover. We're going to tackle how successful people don't externalize and how relationship selling is different than selling through rapport and trust. In any case, if you like the program, hit like, follow us, and comment. We have lots of interesting notes that will follow up on the show notes. You'll be able to find us on YouTube, on Instagram, and wherever else you find your podcasts. A special shout out to our sponsor, Partner Staffing. In any case, here we go. This is Hamish Knox. All right, well, welcome to the show, Hamish.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you, and look forward to hearing what we have to talk about. Carol, who set us up, she had lots of great things to say about you and said she had a great experience with you in school.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. Well, I guess quickly, let's just say you're involved with the Sandler training program, and tell us, just maybe give us a quick intro so we know who we're talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hamish Knox, I run the Sandler office in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Sandler is the largest leadership and sales development company in the world. I also host the Full Funnel Freedom podcast.
Excellent. Yeah, we want to hear about that too. Carol and I were looking at that.
Perfect.
So, and you must have spent some time at the schools you must do some programs there and get involved in the school.
I'm grateful that I get invited to speak to lots of groups, and including Carol's class. The professor invited me in to speak, and I pay Carol very well to say nice things about me, so I'm glad I'm getting a return on my investment. I get invited to talk to lots of different groups about lots of different things, because ultimately Sandler is about creating more effective human-to-human interactions. So wherever there's a human being interacting with another human being, we can provide some support and guidance. Most people know us for sales. Our largest growth is in our sales leadership and our executive development. Ultimately, though, it's a more effective human-to-human interactions. I have clients who say I have better relationships with my spouse, partner, children, friends, et cetera, using the stuff that you theoretically taught me on how to sell more effectively or how to grow my business more effectively.
Cool. So what's the problem in the world today?
How long did we say we have, Craig? Lack of clarity, right? Yep. So one of the things that we say regularly, actually I was saying this last week in our sales leadership group, a leader's number one job is to create clarity. But really, if we macro that out, a human being's number one job is to create clarity with other human beings. However, we have been socialized, especially in North America, that we shouldn't create clarity, because someone who disagrees with us is going to take their giant megaphone and scream about whatever it is that they screen capped or didn't happen to like about the micro thing that we said. And so ultimately, we are creating a culture of ambiguity.
Right.
And human beings can handle a little bit of ambiguity. Like if you said to me, hey, Hamish, let's go grab coffee today at 3 o'clock at this coffee shop. And I go, okay. So I show up at like 2:55 and you're not there. Like, okay, well maybe you show up right at the stroke of 3. I don't know, because we were just getting to know each other. And it's like, okay, so it's kind of ambiguous. And then 3 o'clock comes and you're still not there. I'm like, okay, well did Craig say 3 or maybe he said 3:15? I don't really, or maybe it was a different coffee shop or whatever. And so it's ambiguous.
Yeah.
Well, fast forward 3:05, 3:10, now I'm getting anxious. So ambiguity becomes anxiety. And now I'm like, oh man, like, am I offside? Like, did Craig say that he wanted to get together for coffee? Like, and I didn't ask for your phone number, so I don't know how to contact you. Well, let's fast forward to 3:15, 3:20. Now I'm afraid. So ambiguity becomes anxiety and becomes fear, and no human being wants to be afraid. People who want to watch horror movies like it for the thrills. Anxiety is a low-level stressor that has been demonstrated to cause major physiological damage over time. So by creating this culture of ambiguity where we really don't speak the truth, we really don't speak plainly and create clarity with each other, we are damaging our society.
And we're doing it as a hedge, right? Like I'm hedging because I'm unsure of something and unsure of you. I'm unsure of something else. So,
exactly. So we're dipping our toes in the water, right? Like, oh, maybe I'll ask Hamish out for coffee and see if he's a nice enough guy that I really want to talk to him again. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of ways of testing how genuine the other person is until they demonstrate that they're not. And I say to a lot of my clients, I don't care what people say, I care what people do.
Right.
So I'm more interested in their behavior than in the words they say. And in fact, I have 2 daughters, 9 and 12. one of my colleagues in Sandler shared a story years ago about how his daughter turned 13, and like fathers of daughters who turned 13, he had a lot of anxieties about, oh, boys and all this. And so he went to one of his clients who had older children, and he said, hey, what should I do? Because like I don't want to be the dad on the porch with the shotgun and the cliches, but what do I do? And he said, and my colleague's client said, just say to her, don't listen to what the boys say, watch what the boys do. And that's all you need to know. And that's really a great way of going about life, is someone might look on the surface to be not someone we want to hang around with, but by their behavior, they demonstrate that we can trust them.
Yeah, and remind them that I do have a shotgun.
Also, yes, yeah. So, by the way, it's not just the behavior. There is that, oh, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah.
I've got it in the closet.
Yeah. Yes. I have kids that have gone through that journey.
Yes.
One thing you said that's interesting that I forget who told me, and it goes back like, I don't know, I've been in the world for a long time. So it was someone said to me, so he goes, Craig, just remember, we don't pay people for effort, we pay people for results. So it was interesting because you said something there about just watch the effort, watch what's actually happening, watch what occurs at the end, not the kind of the song and dance and the circus around it. Totally. It's watch what actually evolves out of it. So
amen. And that also ties into like results are lagging indicators. Right, yep. So like revenue or widgets produced or whatever, that's lagging indicators. Yep. I want to see what is the effort, and so if the behaviors or the effort is consistent, the results will be consistent. Yep. And as you and I have both experienced, when behavior or effort is erratic, results are erratic.
Yeah,
and we want to control for that over time.
Yeah, one thing that we do here in our bigger organization is we have a methodology. I don't know. Perfect. I'll share it with you. And basically, we say, look, here's the end product result that we would expect you to accomplish through a reasonable level of effort. And so we get to, at the end of every week, we say, okay, did you achieve the thing that we had set as a goal? No. Okay, well, let's look at the next thing down. And then if that wasn't, let's keep going down and figure out where that effort component slipped, or maybe where there's a skills gap. So we're doing a gap analysis on a regular basis.
Love it. And that is, as leaders, that is our job, is to define the mountaintop, right? So here's the ultimate result. And then also something, I named it a MAP, minimal acceptable performance, which when you bring someone on board is, hey, Craig, welcome aboard. Really excited about having you. Think you've got a long-term future here. By the way, this is the bare minimum that we expect you to do in order to stay here. And by the way, the bare minimum is not literally the bare minimum. It's a little bit above that. Yeah. But we ultimately, if we don't give our people that guidance, they're just going to default to their comfort zone, or they're going to default to what they did before, which might not actually be helpful to getting us from where we are to where we want to be.
Yeah. That's an interesting side topic, because our world is all about hiring and recruiting. Your world is a little bit. It's actually may have crossover, but when you look at people who are ultimately successful as, let's just default to salespersons, because it's it's the dirty word we can use. But are there core nugget characteristics of those individuals, and are they? And I guess it's something I've struggled with over the years. Is it immutable? Like, is it? If I can find these three things in someone, they're going to be successful, or is it a learned skill, and that we're going to, and I guess for your benefit, we're going to have to say it's learned, because otherwise, if it's immutable, then we don't need to have this conversation. But what are those skill sets? What are the things that make someone good versus mediocre versus possibly even terrible?
Absolutely. The salespeople and leaders are made, not born. And especially in Canada, there is no sales degree, right? Now there's sales classes. They tend to be wrapped into marketing. They treat sales as a dirty thing. It's like, oh, that's sales stuff. It's like, well, as one of my dear friends says, the first job ever was actually sales. Now, what was being sold was up for negotiation, but the original first job was sales. Yeah. So, few things. Number one is genuine curiosity. The best sellers that I have ever had a chance to interact with, whether they were clients of mine or just part of my network, are genuinely curious. They are also genuinely interested in supporting their clients in solving their problems, not pushing a product or a solution on them. They're also highly ambitious and driven. So they have a vision of their future that is bigger than their present, and they're constantly taking small baby steps forward. So they understand that success is not these giant leaps and bounds or a whale falls in their lap and they make their number for the quarter. It's small, consistent activities done over and over and over again. It's, in fact, as one of my friends says, the best sellers are boring. Because they just do the same stuff over and over and over again. Yeah, the conversation's going to be a bit different, but ultimately, they're boring. So genuine curiosity, genuine other focus, looking to support others, and high ambition and drive would be the top three things I would look for in a successful
what's
seller.
one I throw this in. I totally agree with your assessment. And I often, when I interview people for sales types roles, I often ask them, what do you think are those top skills? I often throw in control as well. Because, and it is an element of, it's almost an element of tenacity where, you can't be tenacious. And it goes back to that cliche where action without direction's just action.
Totally.
So, people who control the lane, and they know where they're headed, those people tend to be, in my mind, more successful too. And they see opportunity and they try to get rid of the fluff and noise to focus in on the stuff. And sometimes it's interesting because all of those characteristics start to play together. Because curiosity and tenacity weirdly have this connection where it's like a curious person is going to say, what is the thing that's going to distract me, right? And what is it that is going to be the go forward thing? So it's an interesting analysis of the salesperson or whatever we call ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And also those skills are like, I can't just say, so Craig, are you ambitious and driven?
Yeah, because I'm going to lie to you. Of course. Just tell you right now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the best sales job that sellers often do is in the interview because the leader has never been trained how to interview effectively. So they ask about a whole bunch of hypotheticals like, how would you handle this situation, Craig? Yeah. And we're all going to tell our interviewer what we think they want to hear as opposed to tell me how you handled this in the past, right? So situation, action, result. Tell me about a time when you handled blank, or tell me a time when you did blank, and past behavior is a great indicator of future behavior and whether or not you might be a good fit on my team.
Man, I feel like we've talked before. I say a lot of that stuff. It's pretty funny. When you're talking about sales being the original job, are you being specific? Are you talking about fill in the blank?
Well, they say that prostitution was the original first
I'm thinking
job.
About kids because I think we all had that role.
Well, there was also
Mom,
that. Also that.
I need this. So yeah, and it's funny how we drop that as we get older.
True.
You know what's an interesting. I don't know what your thought would be on this, but in the world of trying to hire salespeople, we do that, and we hire for outside and we hire internally. It's interesting that. We have that same experience as like, what would you do in this situation and those sort of things. And then, we've had salespeople, of course, everyone has, who sold us. They're great interviewers.
Totally.
Right? And then they plop down and it's like, okay, well, whew, I got the job. And that's all that really mattered was they got the job. And then you get, like 10 minutes later, after you sit there watching them do Zippo for 10 minutes, then you get a phone call from some guy in Chicago who barely speaks English, who's going to sell your pants off. Like, he is so excited to even be talking to you. And I want to offer that guy a job.
Yeah.
Who's the funny one I want to offer a job to is often, like on the C-train tracks, they have them on diagonal corners and they'll be selling some ambiguous charity.
Yes.
It's like, you gotta give me $20 so we can support some educational thing in some foreign country you've never heard of. And it's like, man, I want to hire you right now. Like, you are amazing. And they won't let you go.
No.
So, yeah, it's shocking.
Persistence, right? You talked about tenacity and persistence. And I also find that, the best sellers are not walking around on the street with their resumes. And as you've probably got this experience. And actually, I have this theory. I haven't proven it out because I don't have the data. I, based on experience, feel that most sellers at high-end auto dealerships used to be servers at steakhouses.
Really?
And I've done it because talking to a few of them, right? More than one. And hey, how'd you get this job? Well, the owner came in and I was their server and they really liked me. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So I tell leaders that I work with, like, especially if you're looking for those hidden roles,
that's funny.
like inside sales or customer support, poach the inside sales or customer support people that you talk to.
Yeah.
If you call up your cable company or your phone company and you have a really good customer service experience, poach them. I have one client who hired someone who they refer to as their Starbucks girl, because literally they were the person at Starbucks who took their order every morning, and one day they're like, hey, have you ever thought about something beyond Starbucks? And they're like, actually, I have. And then they ended up hiring them in a sales role.
Yeah, that's funny, hey? Well, and who knows where people come from, but you're probably right. Like those people that we connect with, and it's almost like they have this broader capacity to build chemistry with people. Isn't that that's kind of an odd thing?
Building connection.
Yeah.
Right? Building connection right away, because that starts that human-to-human interaction that ultimately leads in potentially a sale or a new job.
Yeah. And it's something you had said off camera was that, and it's maybe a drum that you're beating, is that rapport is more important than relationships. And like, what does that mean? Like, kind of dive into it.
I actually had a very, very experienced quote-unquote seller yell at me about that in a workshop when I brought it up. So the root of rapport is the word trust. Now, do people trust salespeople? All the audience is screaming no, and that's the case. So whenever a buyer is giving us an order, first order, 50th order, doesn't matter. What they are saying in code words is, I trust you. Now, if it's the first order, it's I trust you to deliver based on what I've heard from you. If it's the 50th order, it's I trust you to deliver in the way that you have before. And as a good friend of mine, his name's Carlos, says the sale doesn't come from the relationship comes from the sale. So relationships are super important, but they take a lot of time to evolve. And Harvard did a study several years ago that showed selling based on relationships is actually the single worst way to be successful as a seller. Because you're basically waiting around, keeping your fingers crossed, going, I really hope that Craig gives me a deal today because he really likes me. Yeah. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of sellers, and especially in Calgary, it's like, well, I took him fishing, or I took him to golf, or I took him to the hockey game. And it's like, I'll take free stuff all day long, man. Yeah. Doesn't mean I'm going to buy from you. No. But heck, I got no problem glad handing and, saying some polite words. So that's what I mean by rapport beats relationships. So it's not that relationships aren't important, but we need to understand that our buyers are not giving us an order because they like us. It's because they trust us. And those are two very different things that sellers usually screw up.
Yeah. It was interesting. You got me thinking about a time, and it probably dates back to the late 90s, where I went into some suit store, and the guy, his, it's almost like a pickup line. Everyone's got this startup pickup line. He walks up to me and puts his hand out and he goes, "Let's be friends." It's like, let's not be friends.
Pass.
I got lots of friends. I don't need more. And it was probably pre-Facebook, so it was,
Yeah.
But I don't want to. I'm good.
Yeah, exactly.
I need to trust you. You're right. I really just need to trust you to say, that looks good on you. This is too big. This needs to be cut in. Those sort of things. Versus, I don't really need more friends.
Yeah, very true. Well, and our audience can't necessarily see me. I don't buy off the rack. I'm 6'7" and I have extra long arms. So off the rack doesn't fit in my world. I actually bought a suit once from a store that serves tall individuals, and it was 50% off. But the alterations brought the suit back up to the original price to actually fit me. So I do have to get custom. And this is the thing is, I recently switched over to a different tailor.
I see your label.
And
I see the label.
And
I don't know that label.
Yeah. So LGFG Fashion House. I'll give them a shout out because Aaron is really incredible. And it took me a while to build up the trust. And it doesn't mean he wasn't a nice guy from the beginning, but originally I was like, hey, dude, I got one.
Yeah.
And as much as I like you and I've enjoyed our conversation, I got one. And then eventually it was like, I don't got one anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for something else. And I trusted Aaron enough to stay in touch. And so then I circled back to him and was like, hey, man, I'm ready now. And he's like, happy to help you out. And the other cool thing was he wasn't just sitting on his hands. And this is no detriment to Aaron. This is what a lot of sellers do is they sit on their hands and go, I really hope Carol calls me today. I really hope Carol calls me today. Instead of going out and creating new opportunities and filling their funnel themselves instead of waiting from pennies to heaven, from heaven to fall into the lap.
It's funny. I relate a lot to stories, and I guess so. I've used different tailors over time, and I had one tailor I was using, and when I went to, he was probably great, and and I would go in, and he would say, "Nobody else can do what I do," and it's like, well, I don't know if you're right or not, but maybe, but it didn't build trust in me. And then ultimately ended up going to a different tailor, and he was just efficient and the whole process, and it built trust really.
Yeah.
More so than the other guy telling me that he was amazing and that he was going to show me how to do all this stuff. It was an interesting experience that way.
I believe it. Too many of us say and do things that we think are helping. They actually unintentionally damage our rapport with our buyers, and they push them away, like you just illustrated. I have another one that drives me insane is sellers like, well, we partner with our clients. No, you take their money and sell them services. Like let's call it what it is. Your buyer knows that you are a salesperson, and they know that they want your money, and so unless you're actually forming like a legal partnership, because that is a legal thing, we're doing a joint venture, you don't partner with your buyers.
Yeah.
You sell to them. So let's just say that we sell to our buyers, and that actually is going to raise our our credibility because we're calling it what it is as opposed to creating this ambiguous, well, what does partnership actually mean?
Yeah. It would be funny if you went to a car dealership and said, I'm going to partner with you to help sell you a car. It's like, well, only if you pay half. Yeah. I remember when I was in the car business 100 years ago, one of the, he was one of the managers at the time. He said, I can't help you. I can't sell you a car. I can only help you buy a car.
Love it.
That was pretty smart. I thought it carried that with me for a long time.
Yeah, it's a brilliant way of phrasing it because there's the cliche of people love to buy and hate to be sold.
Yeah.
So that is a great reframe that your manager gave you of what you're seeking to do, and if it's not a good fit, tell the buyer.
Yeah.
You'll raise your credibility, and they'll think highly of you. I've had clients come back to me after I've said, listen, not a good fit right now. No now doesn't mean no forever. Still love you, just means we're not working together. And go with whatever other thing that you're doing. And they circle back to me 2 months, 3 months, 12 months later and go, hey, listen, man, I went and did that thing. It wasn't what I wanted. Can we have another conversation? I'm like, absolutely. No hard feelings on my side.
Yeah.
All you said was you didn't want to work with me for right then.
Right.
Now is right now. Let's have another conversation.
Yeah. So has there been a bit of an evolution of it, like where the sales world has evolved a bit? We've maybe moved away from going door to door and selling, let's not burn any particular industry because it still exists.
Yeah, it does.
Like there's alarms and knives and I don't know if vacuum cleaners are still sold door to door possibly. But has there been an evolution of it where it's less? Like I feel like I don't know. I'm answering my own question, but it feels like the algorithm has. We're in the matrix, and the algorithm is instead of us having to. Wander aimlessly in a white space till someone says, this is what you need to buy. That thing just kind of floats in front of us and then we accept it into our lives. It's kind of a weird evolution of what's happened.
It's very fair. So ultimately, for now, we are still selling to human beings. That will change. But for now, we are still selling to human beings. And human beings have their own hopes and fears and dreams and worldviews that unfortunately most salespeople try to insert their worldview on their buyer. Yeah. So what's really changed is sellers have gotten lazy, for lack of a better term, because there's all these technologies, algorithms, AI, all this wonderful stuff. And of course, Google and Yahoo changed their email rules last year because there was just too much spam, for lack of a better term, going out. So what's really changed is how the buyers want to engage with a seller. And so there was a study, I think it was McKinsey put out that like 73% of business buyers, and these are like big enterprise, want to have a rep-free experience. That is, they do not want to talk to a seller at all from first acknowledgement of I need a thing to they closed it, they got it, it's installed. And some people go, well, that's really scary. It's like, no, they've been trained by bad sellers. Yeah. And so, I don't want to stick my hand in a meat grinder every single day. That doesn't feel very good. So what has changed is that the sellers got lazy, the buyers got access to way more information because now they can just basically search everything or use AI or whatever, and sellers have not kept up with the fact that the buyers got smarter. And so what the sellers are still trying to do, and again, sellers, I love all of you. This is a broad brush I'm painting you with. Sellers are still trying to push the buyer to where they want them to go instead of meeting the buyer with where they're at and supporting them in getting them to where the buyer wants to be, as opposed to where the seller thinks they should be.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So, and is it industry specific, or does this I'm just trying to think if there's exceptions to the rule at all, but I think it's pretty ubiquitous, actually.
It really doesn't matter whether you are selling something. Like I pre-COVID, when we were all meeting in the same physical space, I had a client whose self-identified sales cycle was 30 minutes. So they basically sold print advertising, a lot of inbound leads. Hi, what publications are you looking to advertise in? Get me a credit card. Sitting next to them was a client whose self-identified sales cycle was 36 months because they were in pipelines and commissioning.
Yeah.
They could still have a conversation because it was still human to human. And so processes are time agnostic.
Right.
Right? So it just says follow the process as opposed to follow it in this time period. And so whether your process is 30 minutes long, 36 months long, it doesn't matter. What we need to keep the focus on is it's not about us, it's about the other person.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because it really puts that sales cliche of this guy could sell ice to an Eskimo into perspective. And I think we've all been in that where we've been sold something and then we regret it. Like we have buyer's remorse almost immediately afterwards. So yeah, that's an interesting experience.
Yeah, and it happens to all of us. And that's the other thing that we forget as sellers, and I'll often do this thing in workshops, so I'll say, yeah, in sales, we're taught to get the check and get what? And someone will be like, out. I'm like, you went a little too quick. You should have just paused for half a second before you said get out. But that's what we were I was taught to do that, right?
Yep.
Hey, Carol, thanks very much. I'll get you your stuff next week. Bye. And, okay, now I've just discounted the fact that I've got a human being who I'm selling to.
Right.
And that human being is going to have buyer's remorse because I'm a human being and I have buyer's remorse. So how can I make that human interaction much more effective? I can address it in a moment. Hey, Carol, I'm looking forward to working with you. Out of curiosity, I know I get buyer's remorse every now and then. What's going to cause you to want to back out of what we just agreed to? Nothing. I'm in. Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I've said it. Now, that's not a magic wand, because we're still selling to human beings, and human beings lie sometimes. And I've said that to a buyer once, and they said, nothing, I'm in. I totally see how you're going to help me. And literally 8 hours later, I got an email that said, hey, man, we need to pause. And I said, totally cool. And I've literally never spoken with them again. It was like 8 years ago.
And they ghost you out.
And they ghost me. And I still see them on LinkedIn every now and then. I was like, I wonder what's going on with them. Because again, I still love them. I'm just not working with them.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that one of the other, I have just filled with cliches today. One of the other good cliches I heard was that, and I feel like it's evolved a lot, is that telling isn't selling.
Amen.
And I remember, like, one of the first things I ever did out of university, I was with Canada Life, and I was flogging life insurance, and we literally, no one will be able to see this, but we had a binder like this. It would just sit on its edge, and it was like all right, what's your problem today, and how much money, and then we would just do this, like we were literally just going through the binder.
Right.
And then at the end, it was very hard to say no, and they would say yes, but we would have so much buyers, and they had a 24-hour out, and it was kind of crazy time, but
absolutely. And now all that stuff that you just demonstrated, a buyer can do by themselves online.
Yeah, that's right.
We're not needed. And there's that, you've probably heard this cliche about, like, well, you're not going to be replaced by AI. You're going to be replaced by a human being using AI. And then my thought is, well, if we're all using AI, who's getting replaced? Right? Like if we're all using it, who's getting? So what I've been sharing, especially with the leaders and the sellers that we work with, is AI is great for 80%. It'll get 80% of the way. So all that rote pre-call planning and interview prep and all that is good. It's when we start abdicating the 20% of us thinking, that's when we start to go sideways. So really, the seller's job now is to support our buyer in the 20%. Getting them from, okay, you got 80% of the way here without me. Awesome. You've probably got some misconceptions that I need to uncover before I go forward. How can I figure out that 20% that is the gap that you don't necessarily want to tell me about yet because you don't necessarily trust me? And once I get that, I'm much more likely to have a better conversation. I'm much more likely to close the sale, and I'm much more likely to keep that client long term. Right.
That's smart. I remember when AI was just kicking in and ChatGPT, I forget what month it was, but when ChatGPT just kicked in and everyone, I was going to the gym and everyone was like, oh, ChatGPT this and that. And then one day I walked in and they go, hey, Craig, what's going on? You look a little tired. And it's like, I was up all night answering ChatGPT questions for you. So, what do you think? Is this a computer doing this behind the scenes? It's me.
Exactly.
No one knew. But
no, of course.
So, like, since we're a little bit on cliches, do you have any favorite sales cliches that you kind of you like playing with? Or
well, there's one that is on the flip side, which is buyers are liars.
Yeah, that's true.
And
Wait, before I tell you, this is hilarious. Of the many jobs, we're going to cover every one in this podcast. I used to work in a bank, and this is terrible. I won't even say what bank it was, but we had a poster. It was like literally a printed poster in the back. Like no customer would have ever seen it. And it said it right at the top. It said, "Buyers are liars." And it had a monkey, and then at the bottom it said, "And ugly too."
Oi.
It just got you to remember. Yeah, they're not telling the truth, so...
And then so when I have a seller who, maybe we're doing a coaching call, or maybe it's in a collaborative session, like, oh, buyers are liars. I'm like, yeah, who trained them?
Yeah.
Because they didn't learn that on their own. Like they didn't, they weren't born going, I should stop telling the truth. Yeah. And this is actually something else that is a bit of a cliche in human communications is watch the face.
Yeah.
Well, there's data out there, mostly Paul Ekman stuff, that shows human beings as young as 10 weeks old can alter their facial expression to lie to their parents.
Wow.
So if the listeners out there, you're selling to older than 10 weeks old, they got a lot of practice making the face look the way that they think you want it to be. So humans are lazy, right? Our brains are lazy. They're wired that way. It's okay. And we default. We go to heuristics. We go to these default networks where it's like, oh, Craig is dressed a certain way. He's speaking a certain way. Therefore, Craig is this.
Yeah.
Like
that's
a
human
hypothesis.
thing. Yeah.
So whenever I hear like, oh, this person is this way, or all buyers are liars, or this group of people is this way, I think, okay, that's a hypothesis. Mm-hmm. Let's go run an experiment.
Yeah.
And the experiments are usually questions to understand a bit more, and maybe we prove that our hypothesis is right.
Yeah.
And maybe we prove that it's wrong and we learn something.
Yeah.
And we have a better relationship.
Yeah. At some levels, that's the whole study of sociology, is really just testing those hypotheses.
Exactly. And that's where sales for me is the scientific method. I have a hypothesis. Hypothesis is Craig is a qualified buyer for my services. Yeah. Okay, experiment. Ask question. New data. Ask more questions. Eventually, my hypothesis is proven correct. Craig becomes my client. Or it's proven false. Craig is not a good fit. Okay, revise hypothesis. Move forward from there.
That's something I've always liked is I've always, when I talk to salespeople, I always think, like, a big part of what you're doing is, like, when you think of how to do it wrong, it's I talk to every single person and I pitch them the exact same thing.
Yep.
And then I hope that by doing so, that sooner or later it's going to hit. And then, but if my whole process is evaluating the quality or the likelihood of that person being a future buyer, then I really can filter, because we're going to talk about the funnel, but like if you put like the Venn diagram, we put 8 billion people into the funnel. Well, really what's coming out the bottom is the qualified client. It's not, we're not, the funnel concept is basically everyone's going to come out the bottom at some point, but that's wrong. That's the thing is wrong. It's almost more like a sieve. Yeah. Because we only want the qualified ones. Otherwise, why are we still talking?
You and I are completely aligned.
Yeah. So anyway, tell us about that podcast that you do. Like what's it's probably been fun and
it's a blast. So the podcast is called Full Funnel Freedom. So I am an author. I like alliteration. So that's why it is Full Funnel Freedom. And Full Funnel Freedom was created back in August of 2018 with an article I wrote on my LinkedIn profile. And it was really this idea, thinking back to my own sales career, my own career as an entrepreneur, and all the entrepreneurs and leaders I've supported is, when your funnel actually looks like a funnel instead of a pencil or a stomach in an antacid commercial, there's a lot of freedom that comes with that, because you're like, I can work on the business, not in the business, and all this other stuff. So I wrote this article. It was like one of the highest engagement articles I had ever written on my LinkedIn profile. And then a couple of years ago, I launched this podcast. And ultimately, the podcast is designed to, number one, celebrate sales leaders and the success they've created through others. Because sales leaders don't get a lot of opportunities to be celebrated. And as even one of my recent guests said, and even if they are celebrated, it's like, Craig, well done. Now beat that number.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the other point is to support the audience of sales leaders in keeping their funnels consistently looking like a funnel, because sales leader and seller are really two of the only jobs in the world where you are one. Right?
Yeah.
Right? Hey, Craig, congratulations. You're a seller. Go sell stuff.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do? Hey, Carol, you're the best seller. Now you're the sales leader. Okay, those are very different skill sets.
Yep.
Like, what are we doing here? So ultimately, it was to celebrate and support, which are two of my foundational values. And I get to talk to sales leaders literally around the world and learn all kinds of crazy things that I never would have learned if I hadn't had this podcast. And I have an absolute blast every time I'm talking to a guest on the show.
Yeah, it's fun. I like that you brought up Michael Gerber's Work on the Business, Not in the Business.
Totally.
That's a great book. It's what's the book called? Holy smokes.
And I'm blanking on it too. As soon as you said Michael Gerber, I can see the cover, but I cannot see the name. We'll put it in the show notes.
Wow, that's shocking. I've read that book so many times. And it's interesting, in English, we get stuck with the words that we have to work with.
Yeah.
And we say sales leader, and obviously a sales leader might be defined simply as the person who has the highest numbers, greatest number of sales, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But there's a layer in most businesses where there's a leader of potentially the leaders, but of all the salespeople, whether they're leaders or not.
Yes.
Where does that leader come into play in the sales, to use that term again, like into that sales environment? Like how does a leader function well?
That's a loaded question. I love it. Thank you. So number one thing, and I've had a couple of, or more than a couple of clients come to me, and they're a top performer, and they come to me and go, hey, private coaching call, hey, Hamish, I just got offered the sales manager, director of sales, fill in title.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. And I ask them this one question. I say, you have to answer. Either answer is correct, but you have to answer this question. Do you want to create success through your own efforts, or do you want to create success through others?
That's really good.
You have to pick one, because there's again, socialized in North America, we're supposed to start as a BDR, we go to an AE, we go to a team lead, and some people just want to be the best damn salesperson that they can be, because that hits all their goals. There's something that I've talked about with leaders around all-star receptionists. Like, we're socialized that receptionist is like the lowest, closest to the front door role. The fact of the matter is, that receptionist might want to be in that role because it allows them to achieve all their other goals.
Yeah.
And so, awesome. Hold that person safe, support them, make them an all-star receptionist, and don't put the pressure on them to rise up in the world when they really don't want to.
Isn't that at some levels, when we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that is self-actualization.
Yes.
At the highest level is when you get into a job, and that's the job you love.
Amen, brother. Yeah. So what makes leaders successful? So if they answer the question of, I want to create success through others, right? That's what a sales leader does. Now, again, frontline sales manager, director of sales, all the way up to CRO, it doesn't matter. You're ultimately creating success through others.
Yeah.
Because you're not doing the job. Because if you are doing the job, what I'll say to leaders is, why do you have the sales team?
Right.
Right? So what ultimately makes a leader successful, and I was just speaking at the Sandler Summit on intentionally designing a sales culture, is genuinely seeking the truth. So being genuinely curious. So when a seller comes to you and goes, oh, operations screwed up, they didn't deliver. It's like, okay, that's a story, right? And maybe, by the way, operations did screw up. But let's go investigate that. Let's go explore that before we actually start blasting off emails or whatever that might be. The other thing that makes leaders successful is when they are focused on coaching, not telling. So too many leaders say, well, Craig, when I was in your role, here's what I do. And all that does is create learned helplessness because it's my data, not yours. And so now when the thing I told you to do doesn't work, who are you going to blame, you or me? And we all know the answer to that, right? And then the other thing that it drives me insane, and it happens in Calgary a lot, is a sales leader wants to...
Well, I thought you were going to say bike lanes. Okay. No, it's something else. Okay,
I don't come downtown enough, so those don't bother me very much.
Okay, anyways.
This is what this bothers me is sales leader still wants to prove that they've got it.
Yeah.
Or whatever it might be, and so they go in as the closer. All that does is kill their seller's credibility. It just gets the leader's emotional needs met. The buyer's like, well, then why am I talking to this person? Why haven't I talking to you the whole time? So what makes sales leaders successful is when a seller or a member of their team tries to manage up. Craig, I really need you to come to this meeting with Carol because she's a real tough negotiator. I need your help. Is for that leader to go, Hamish, I'd love to go with you on that call. I'm not able to. How can I support you in being fully prepared?
Right.
So you can have that conversation with Carol.
Yeah.
And then now you've elevated my status, you've clearly set boundaries, and I'm much more prepared to actually go have a successful call and keep my credibility with Carol, my potential client. Yeah. So I don't know if any of that made sense, but that's what I think.
I agree. One of the things that I do, and I think, especially when you have new people, you have to you do a lot of hand holding, of course. And
Absolutely.
then one thing that I do is that even with the newest people, I don't, cat's out of the bag, I guess, but I don't ever introduce myself as more than their coworker.
Love it.
And because I want them to be elevated, like I want them to experience the rush of it. And I want them to be the person that client's going to turn to.
Yeah.
I don't want to be, like, I'm not there to have them open the door for me.
No.
I want them to be the person that's doing it.
Amen, brother. Totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, it's the right way to go. It's, like, I guess at the end of the day, we need to elevate the salesperson too, which is tough as a sales leader because we have to try to elevate them too. And how do you work with people that are, I don't know what the right word is, like where you have a sales team that it's that paralysis where they know what they need to accomplish and they're just struggling with going from A to ultimately B and like how does the leader come in underneath that or maybe above it and pull them up? I don't know which direction we are espousing, but like either there's kind of like that lead like Jesus, or it's the lead like any other number of horrible people.
Well, it's so adults learn by imitation and repetition.
Yep.
So as a leader, and the single best way to develop people in general, especially human to human, is through role play. So I've shared in the past, like I used to do a lot of role play with my ex, and then I'll explain what I mean by that. It does not involve wigs. Yeah. So, because they're in a technical role, and they're very, very good at what they do, and they interact with other human beings, right? They have a manager who they talk to, they have team members who they rely on, they have other departments, and so sometimes they would come to me and go, hey, I have to have an awkward conversation with colleague, boss, other person in another department. Can we role play? Can we practice it out? And most role play is done horribly. And so for a leader, number one, it's role play with the team regularly. Play the seller. So sales leaders who are listening, you play the seller, you debrief, you play the seller again, you debrief, and then your salesperson goes one time, and then you debrief again, and that's it. So you can do that in like 20 minutes. It just doesn't have to be a long time. So number one, we have to demonstrate, lead by example, to your point, right, Craig? So we're going to lead by example. Here's the behavior. Here's how I want you to interact with your buyers. And then we have to hold them accountable. Now, my topic of my first book was accountability, and no one likes to talk about accountability because it sounds like micromanagement. It's actually freedom. So if we set up a system where the beginning of the week we check in and go, Craig, what are you going to accomplish today? Specific, measurable, observable this week. And then on Friday, we sit down and go, hey, Craig, so on Monday you said you were going to do this. How do you do? And we have to hold our people safe. So we have to give our team members permission, protection, and potency. Permission to fail, because they will. They're humans. Protection that when they do fail, it's a coaching opportunity, not a gotcha moment. And potency means the tools and the resources to succeed in their current role. So if we look at a seller, that's going to be tech stack. That's going to be training, whether it's product training, internal training, external training with whatever, a sales coach, whatever it might be. We have to give them that potency, because if we give them a shoelace and tell them to go climb the mountain, that's our fault as a sales leader. However, if we give them, nice, strong anchor rope, and they choose to throw it on the ground and just be like, oh, no, boss, I can't sell stuff. Well, that's on them.
I'm going to do it my way.
I'm going to do it my way. Yeah,
love those ones.
Yeah, love the Frank Sinatra. Like, I did it my way. Well, that's great, but now you're gone because we want to do it as the company way.
Yeah,
so we have a common language.
Let's not reinvent either. Like it's so.
Well, again, going back to that Harvard study, there was the lone wolf was one of the other characters, and they identified that while the lone wolf looks successful on the surface, they cause so much damage internally and externally that the damage caused outweighs the sales they bring in. Oh, wow. Because they're absolutely destroying internally, and I know I've experienced this problem before I joined Sandler. Is you get a seller who goes out and promises the world, which is the only time it's ever happened, right? Where a salesperson promised the world. And
one time, okay.
One time. And then they go internally and go, okay, so operations team, client needs it this way, this way, this way. They need it in half the time we normally do. And by the way, go. Yeah. And the operations team's like, what? Oh, and by the way, we haven't closed the deal yet. Oh. Right? Yeah. I've got a verbal.
Yeah. I got to prove myself.
Yeah.
It's like, oh.
No, you don't.
No.
And mutual.
Yeah. That usually, in my experience, turns into a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah.
that never gets paid for.
Yeah, and then of course the lone wolf is just like, oh, well, that didn't happen, moving on. And the operations team is like, we work nights and weekends for you.
Yeah.
And we're not even going to get a sorry.
Yeah.
So that's where we need to create this unified common language across our team so that everybody's singing from the same songbook in their own way, right? So we don't ever want to have our clients scripted or our sellers scripted. If our sellers sound scripted, they lose massive amounts of credibility. However, we as leaders need to give them the mountaintop, as you mentioned earlier, right? Hey, in order for a deal to be qualified, I need you to hit these 3 mountaintops. I need you to gather these 3 pieces of information to say this is a good potential client. How you go gather those is entirely up to you.
Yeah.
Because the way that I communicate, you communicate, and Carol communicates are very different. And if I try to dictate to the two of you how you should get to that mountaintop, again, you're going to sound scripted, you're going to be uncomfortable, and you're going to lose rapport.
You know what was it? I love the study or thoughts of scripting. What I found has been interesting, like I would completely agree, as soon as you sound like you're just chop, 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 it just sounds rotten. Yeah. But some of the best salespeople I've ever seen, they do huge amounts of stuff, they say lots of stuff, and then they get to the one point where they have to have the one question that they're going to ask, and it's always the same. And they will script one sentence.
Yes.
And it's interesting because I think psychologically what it does is it pins that point for them, because when you don't have it, then you're just wandering around. But then when you know you have to hit that one button, then boom. And I remember in the car business, there was one of the best salespeople I've ever worked with, Henry Lamb. And he used to get to a whole point in the conversation, and he would simply say, is that going to be MasterCard or Visa? And it was like, dude, that is like amazing. And everything else was like friendly and fun and rapport and all the stuff and, you know, features and benefits, all that. MasterCard or Visa.
Totally.
It was so good.
Yeah. Yeah. And that ties into, you know, we were talking about earlier about, you know, sellers and experience.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've got 15 years of experience in sales. No, you have 1 year of experience 15 times over. Yeah. And you actually haven't been learning and growing and developing. So you're still using the same stuff that quote unquote worked 15 years ago. Yeah. And you're basically, you know, using your gut. Now, my tummy is not the greatest way to sell. Yeah. Right? I need to have a structure. I need to have outcomes that I can shoot for and have those key phrases. And they are not, so can I show you a way? Right? It's about keeping the buyer safe, creating buyer safety, and making them feel like, yeah, why wouldn't I work with Craig? Yeah. Like, this is a no-brainer. And then there's a Sandler rule that says they can't argue with their own data. When it comes out of their mouth, it's real. When it comes out of our mouth, we're pushy, aggressive salespeople or pushy, aggressive parents, right? Yeah. Eat your vegetables. Like, that's not going to happen.
Good sales technique, Dad.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we never want a seller or somebody a buyer to be like, oh, you went to sales training, didn't you? You've got a shiny new toy to try out. And because that, again, kills rapport, kills credibility. So we want to be conversational. Yeah. We want to be doing like you and I are doing right now, hanging out, having a conversation with a specific end point in mind, though, right? We have to have a purpose because our buyers are not waiting around for a salesperson to come in and be like, can I show you a way? Because they got stuff to do. Yeah. We want to be intentional. We want to be purposeful. And to your point, we want to be conversational. We want it to flow. Yeah.
You know, it was, and this may be kind of a bit slightly off topic, but it's, and I forget who, there was a book written that talked about when someone thinks with a mindset of scarcity versus a mindset of abundance.
Yes.
Remember who that
Love
was?
This book.
Was that Tracy or was that, I forget who it was.
Yeah.
We'll have to look it up. But it's interesting, and I feel like, and maybe just looking for your commentary, but when a salesperson, or whatever we term that to be, gets to a point in their career where they see scarcity versus abundance, it's the beginning of the end. That's what I see anyway. So as soon as someone says, I talked to 100 people today and no one wants what I'm selling, it's like, well, there's the door, because that's about where you're headed. So I don't know. What do you think?
I 100% agree with you, because that starts to externalize, right? Winners don't externalize, right? And so when and there's something that that I talk about with my clients called identity role theory. And so identity is like your self-concept, your self-worth, your self-esteem, and then the roles are the labels we apply to ourselves, right? So I'm a podcaster, business owner, salesperson, father, athlete, et cetera, and no one ever says no to Hamish, the wonderful human being. They say no to a salesperson. And you're allowed to do that, right? You're allowed to, allowed to lie to a salesperson, still get into heaven. It's absolutely okay. And ultimately, when we don't feel good about ourselves on our identity side, when we have low self-worth, we start to externalize. And it's not my problem, my boss didn't give me good leads, or the government sucks, or whatever it might be. And ultimately, when I have heard that from leaders, like, oh, I got this person on my team and they're, saying they're calling 100 people a day and no one wants it, I'll say, well, what are their personal goals?
Yeah. Because
we work harder for our personal goals than anything else. And if a leader can understand the personal goals of every member of their team and tie success of the corporate goals to achievement of the personal goals, and then continually loop that back, hey, Carol, how's it going on saving for the down payment for the condo that you're really excited about? You end up with rocket ships. But as leaders, we've not been trained to do that, right? Arm's length, right? You come work for me, you leave your problems at the door, and when you go home at night, those are your problems. Like, no, they're human beings. And I think that's what the pandemic really identified is we're human. And so if we can be more human in leadership and support the humans who are going to get us to where we want to be, we're much more likely to get there faster and get there more sustainably.
Yeah. It didn't, I think it was Tony Robbins did a whole series of stuff where it was like there was CDs you could buy, if you remember what those were.
Yeah.
And you would put it in and it was like an exercise of, it was like storyboarding and, you're creating your vision board of what you expect out of your life. And
we do vision boards every year. Love vision boards. Great exercise.
What's on them?
Well, what's on them? So right now, the most recent thing I put on there was the World Loppet. So it's a collection of 19 ski marathons, cross-country ski marathons, 50 to 100 kilometers long and around the world. And so there's 4 Canadians who are on the list who have done all of them, including the first one.
Really?
The first person to ever do them was a Canadian back in 2009, and there at some point will be at least 4.
Wow, and you're going to do that?
I just joined I'm looking at joining a Space Dogs cross-country ski club to get some support on that, because right now I've just been going solo, and that's something that I'm genuinely excited about doing.
Interesting. Wow, we'll have to link that one in the show notes. That's
Amen,
fascinating. Brother. What do you think about when, you bring up sports is kind of interesting, and I think there's a lot of sales leaders and hiring people, and they say, look, if we could find someone who's like really good at volleyball, well, clearly they're going to be a really good salesperson of flexible pipe for downhole tools. Can we draw that connection, or is that just, I don't know. So I get lost on that one.
I think that's a little bit of a stretch. I trained Muay Thai for 10 and a half years, Thai boxing. So, one of my former sparring partners still fights in the UFC. He's always been way better than me. I have no problem admitting that. So actually, I was just facilitating a session on hiring. And one of the hiring models that I teach, it talks about experiences, right? What experiences has the person had? And actually it's called the research model. And so on our research model at Sandler Calgary, a must-have for anybody who's going to join the team is an experience of making a sport team by tryout or an arts organization by audition. Because if we think about that, they have to be ambitious and driven. They have to be highly coachable. Now, I have to ask in the interview, like, how long did you last on the team, right? Because if it was 3 weeks, maybe not. But it's about the experience and the mindset that I'm looking for, not necessarily like, oh, you were a great middle blocker, so clearly that you can handle flexible pipe sales in the oil patch. And then a nice to have is that they were the captain. So must have is they had this experience of making the team, making the arts organization. The nice to have is they were the captain or they were the lead or they were a soloist or whatever, because that's ultimately nice to have. That shows a bit other characteristics that I might want on the team. But ultimately, I want to find someone who is ambitious and driven and highly coachable, and that's someone I want to add on my team in any role.
That's interesting. Wow. And then, so I guess what it does is that takes out, it doesn't have to be sports.
No, it doesn't have to be sports. Yeah, because too many of us, I am a gray-haired white male. This is also, a very gray-haired white male thing. Like, they had to play hockey or they had to play football or whatever. It's like, no, they just had to have this experience that they went through a test, right? They were ambitious and driven enough to say, I'm going to put myself forward to go through this test, this audition to be the lead French horn player, and they made it. Well, if they made it, then clearly that demonstrates resilience, it demonstrates tenacity. All the great things that you brought up earlier about what makes a good seller is in that experience. But it doesn't have to be the fact that, they, what is one of my friends says, Aggies hire Aggies, right? So people who went to Texas A&M hire people who went to Texas A&M.
Yeah.
To me, that's a very limiting worldview.
Oh, yeah.
So if it's like, well, you have to have played at least junior A hockey, well, that's great. How many people have not played junior A hockey who could be incredible in that role?
Yeah. Does it identify competitiveness, and is that like an element that's important?
There's competitiveness as well. I'm not as much on like competitiveness, because competitiveness can sometimes turn into that lone wolf.
Yeah.
Where like if I'm a leader, I want to create a team, not a group of individuals.
Right.
And unfortunately, because leaders really don't get training in how to be leaders, oftentimes we end up with a group of individuals and not a true team.
Right, sure.
So I want to limit as much as possible the internal, like nasty competitiveness. The friendly competitiveness is great, but I want to eliminate that nasty internal competitiveness. I would rather have individual ambition and drive that creates support overall, as opposed to 5 sellers who are all trying to eat each other's lunch.
Right, where there's a sharing component where, and I can work together, even though we both have sales goals and both want to win.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, I remember, this is kind of a funny side story. My daughter, when she was quite young, she was in soccer, and she, it was, she was probably 3.
Yeah.
She probably didn't play soccer the entire time she was in soccer. And then I asked her, because everyone got a medal at the end of the season, and then I asked her the next year if she wanted to play again, and she goes, "No, I already won."
Yeah, love it. Love it.
It was over. Competitiveness is done.
Yeah,
so,
check the box, right? Yeah, my eldest, when she was 4, and that was the first time she ever played soccer, and I identified very early on not a team sport player, because like no matter which direction the ball was going, she would just take it and go in that direction. Yeah, and the parents would look at me on the side, and I was like, she's 4. I don't want to pigeonhole her, but like probably not team sports oriented. And so it came to pass.
Yeah. That's a funny experience as a parent when you're sitting there watching your kid, and your kid just does something nuts, and then everyone's like looking down. It's like, dude, what kind of parent are you?
Exactly. Yeah. I absolved myself of that.
Yeah, I had nothing to do. It was his mother. I had nothing to do with it at all. So I guess there was. I just wanted to double back to something you said. Is that you had said that winners don't externalize.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a good. That's a really important thing. It's probably more. We didn't give it any time. We just said it and moved on. But like that's kind of like one of those critical things in sales. Like you need to. And I preach this a little bit where like if a sale falls apart, and you externalize it to say that my client was crazy, the product's broken, my support team's busted, I'm absolved of any responsibility whatsoever, and then you don't go forward.
Correct. You're stuck.
Yeah, you just spiral.
Yeah. And in sales and in life, like this is a talk track I have with my daughters, right? They'll be like, well, it wasn't my fault because of this. The teacher didn't tell me. And I'm like, you know what? That may all be true.
Yeah.
And you did know the project was due. You were like, you told me about the project, so you knew there was a due date. And so winners don't externalize. And for leaders, it is at least a yellow flag if we have a seller that is starting to externalize their problems. Boss marketing, the leads marketing gives me sucks, or the economy's bad, and you know what? Back in 08, 09, which I know is becoming a less and less current reference, but you and I, both remember 08, 09. There were sellers that were tripling their sales targets because they were the only ones going out. I have a colleague of mine who told me a story about a pharmaceutical seller who was in their sales development program, and this is pre-COVID, it's back in 08, 09, and they came into a session one day, and they were literally sweating, and it wasn't hot outside. So my colleague's like, hey, kind of, how's your day going? What's going on? And they said, I just got out of the office of my largest client. And my colleague's like, that sounds like a good thing. And they're like, well, as I was walking into their lobby, walking out was my biggest competitor with a giant smile on their face. And I was like, oh, what's going on here? And that's oftentimes, what's the cliche about 80% of success is showing up?
Yep.
Really, that's true in sales. Are you present? Are you politely, persistently present?
Yeah.
Because if you make it about the buyer, I had this conversation this morning with a salesperson. It's like, well, how often do I follow up without being annoying? I said, well, if you're calling going, Carol, this is the 7th message I've left you. And Carol's like, I don't care. That's your job. Whereas I'm like, hey, Carol, haven't chatted in a couple of weeks. My biggest fear is that the project we talked about is not going to move forward in the time that you want it to because I haven't got this information from you. I'm afraid that we're going to get into a position where it's going to be a big panic. Something's going to get missed and we're going to have to pull our way out of that. I'm looking for a little help. Give me a call back.
Right.
Right? That's making it about the buyer. Yeah. Not about me and getting my emotional needs met.
Yeah. Have you seen? I've seen a huge uptick in the way AI is impacting messaging. Mm-hmm. Like, and I'm getting. It's crazy how many messages I get now versus over even 12 months ago that are, if they're not AI generated, there's no way someone's typing those messages.
Copy paste.
Yeah. Or it's an app even that they've said, hey, I want to do email follow-up, and someone didn't respond, so that causes the AI to generate this comment and push it out. So, and you know how I know for sure that it's happening is I got a message from one person, and then I got the exact same message saying, hey, just so you know, this isn't an AI-generated message kind of message. And it was like, whoa, and two people said it was obviously cut and paste.
Yeah, totally.
Wow.
Totally, yeah, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about, like, our brains are wired to keep us safe, which usually means stuck, which then makes our brains lazy, right? So when it's like, oh, this magical thing will transform the way that you fill in the blank, it's like, oh, can I have some of that?
Yeah.
And then of course, we on the buyer end just get blasted with, I swear this isn't an AI-generated email. Well, yeah, you and the other 18 messages that I've got today that have said exactly the same thing. And so, it is bringing that humanity in, which is why, like, the phone is still an effective way of making sales.
100%.
Like, hey, guys, get off your emails. Pick up the phone and start calling. I know it's talking to strangers. I know your mom is screaming in your head about don't talk to strangers. Talk to strangers.
Yeah. If all a salesperson is doing is flock shooting geese, like, it's just pointless. Yeah. There's so many geese now.
Right.
That's the other issue. There's way more geese now than ever before because we have access to it.
Well, God sent a messenger. Like, hey, Hamish, how was your week? Oh, I was super busy this week, Craig. What did you do? Well, I sent out 50,000 emails. Well, did you get a response? Yeah, one person said unsubscribe. Great week. Like, no? How's that helping?
Well, even if, like, and I guess, that's part of the whole funnel. If you send out 50,000 messages and you get 1,000 responses that are warm, like, oh, man, I'd rather have one hot one than 1,000 warm. Like,
Amen,
it just seems like a lot of work.
Amen.
So pick up the phone.
Yeah. That's the success criteria, right? Like, let's define at every stage, what does success criteria look like for our sellers, the mountaintops, and how does the buyer exit to the next stage? Because to your point about it being a sieve, and some people are like, oh, I don't want my funnel to be a sieve. No, you want to be exiting stuff out that's a bad fit.
You got to move it out.
I don't want my funnel to look like a stomach and a Tums commercial. That's not a good thing.
No. No. Well, on that, listen, I know you're a super busy guy, and we super appreciate you coming here. I'm glad we set this up, and hopefully we can get together, and maybe we'll pick some cool topics, and we'll just drive into it.
Craig, I had a blast. You're a wonderful host.
Thank you.
I would love to come back. I was honored to be here today.
I'll be on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate Carol connecting us. This was an absolute blast.
Yeah, fun. Well, glad to have you, and hopefully you have a great day.
Thanks so much.
All right, thank you very much. All right.